Welcome back to the final part of this tutorial series. You might think we were done the last time, and you're right in a way, because we have done what we wanted to achieve. We have built a web client that shows driving instructions for a route that we enter into our web form. We lived up to those expectations, right? But this is the next step where we can improve things a little bit and make things less complicated, you might think, or use a different product. This is just something that I wanted to add, how you can evaluate which products to use for your web client. Because right now we're using FNC Maps and it's great, we can get the directions if, and I did leave this in intentionally, so I started the web application and I get the error right here that my server yields a request error. So what I have to do, think about it. 3, 2, 1. Of course, the XData server has to get started. So start the XData server. And as soon as that happens, our web application will work too. So go on here, enter, and get directions. In particular, in the last episode, you learned about creating this table. I've given alternatives. If you don't want to use a table, you can use divs to create a bootstrap grid. However, this is done. This application does what it's supposed to do. You could also flip this from, let's say, the service that we're using right now. We're using Leaflet right now. You could flip it to another service. You're done with that kind of stuff. However, let's assume you wrote this XData server with the directions for somebody that does not have FNC Maps. Assume you write it for somebody who only has TMS WEB Core, doesn't have FNC Maps, and still wants to display anything. So the textual information is fine, right? No problem. And with regards to the map, what options do they have? So we remove FNC Maps right here. So we end up with our div with the map. And let's look at the tool palette and type map. And what we see is FNC Maps. Of course, we don't have that. However, TMS WEB Core comes with 2 mapping components out of the box. And this is me saying this end of January 2024. Mid-January 2024, TMS released WEB Leaflet Maps. So you won't find this in any of my books yet because it hasn't been there yet. It's great to have it because WEB Google Maps, let's assume we drop that in here. We need, in addition to the actual control, we also need an API key. Okay, so we need a Google Maps API key. We need to remember to restrict this API key because otherwise people would be able to extract it from your application and use it themselves. So we're very, very careful doing that. Restrict it to your own domain, for example, or IP address, whatever is more applicable. With that being said, this component has been there from day one, I would say. Like, I remember writing the book for TMS WEB Core in 2000, and I have to go way back. I started writing it in 2018. So in 2019, I was at the TMS days, and Bruno and I talked in person, and I made the decision to incorporate this component kind of centrally as like something that gets fed with information from the backend and also to explain it at great length because I thought it was great to have a mapping component in your web framework right then and there. So this component has been there right from the start. Has the disadvantage, of course, you tie yourself to Google. It doesn't have anything to do what your backend here in this case does with the instructions, because this component, actually, if you open my book and I say like, well, however, this component already can do routing. Well, it can draw a route on a map or something like that, but it can't give you the instructions, the step-by-step driving instructions. Still, you tie yourself to Google. That's the number one downside. What we'll see with the other component as well, the data types are a little bit more spartanic, meaning FNC Maps has, and this is one of the biggest strengths of FNC Maps, in my opinion, and I've pointed this out to the developer team a million times, how much I love the foundation of FNC Maps, how they build the classes and other structures, because we have 4 coordinates. We have a coordinate class, we have a coordinate record, and then we have arrays of those. And each of these classes are used for all the different mapping providers, for all the different functions that are available. So that's what is the number one strong point of FNC Maps, that you have common types for all the different mapping services. And that's actually what the unit is called. It's called TMS FNC Maps Common Types, because if we go in here in our form, we should be able to find it right here. There it is, TMS FNC Maps Common Types. And in there are all the declarations for the different data types used in FNC Maps over and over and again. The coordinate record, and then we have the coordinate class and all that kind of stuff, and the GPX technology. Everything is defined in this class, and it is for all the different mapping services. For example, bounds are a different one. So these data types can be used with any mapping services. And obviously, if we are just using a class like this one here, the TWeb Google Maps, it doesn't stand on a foundation like that. It has obviously its own data types, but if you use, for example, the Leaflet Maps, you might have a completely different structure or no structure at all. And that is one major advantage of FNC Maps, just saying. However, of course, you get yourself FNC into the boat if you use it. And if you just want to work with TMS WEB Core and have a map, it might be the quickest solution to just use one of the base components that's included. Today, as my book and other videos on this very feed already look at the Web Google Maps component, I'm going to take the TWeb Leaflet Maps component, brand new. Love it. So let's remove this here. Type leaflet. Make sure to pick the one with TWeb leaflet right here, this. And we name it map again. Name it the same way. And also on the structure view, we need to make sure that the div owns our component. Now I'll never know where these are. The structure view is right here. I never use it. Sorry. So here, the map is hosted inside of div map. Perfect. This should work. If we look at the component, we find out right away, wow, there is an element ID already. So we might not need the host, the div host. We might not need it. Might be cool. So let's try that first. So we remove both of them and we just add the leaflet maps right here. Sorry. Oh, yeah, it's correct one. TWeb Leaflet Maps, yes, perfect. And let's tie this one to the map, control div map. Let's use this one. And the element class now, we don't have anything like that. And the element position, let's say we ignore that because we want to use the position from the HTML. And with regards to height, we say auto. Hopefully that will make TMS WEB Core use the HTML. We name it map. So if we compile it now, we should receive quite a few error messages. Of course, I'm still in the wrong project. I'm still in the XData server. So swipe over like this. And now compile the web application, and we should receive quite a few errors because obviously I removed all the component, I removed the component, the map component right here. So that should trigger something. And we also need to remove everything that's FNC. So remove this one because we want to remove the dependency, right? So just removing the component won't remove all the dependencies of FNC. So like this, we save. Perfect. Do we have more FNC stuff in there? Nope. So we compile again. By the way, you don't have to do this yourself. I have the source code prepared for you. I'll explain that at the end of this video. So we don't have, and this is what I said, we don't have the TMS FNC Maps polyline anymore. That's an FNC specific data type. So let's look what we do in our update method to update the table. We draw the map at the same time. So begin update is something that the leaflet component can do. However, if we look at map clear, so we see the structure is different. We have with FNC maps, like we have a markers list, we have a polyline list. This component works differently. We have map, and we can see a clear markers. Let me remove that. And we also have to clear the polylines. Again, it's a different call than with FNC maps. So we take out the polylines just to show you how you could draw polylines. You would say add polyline, and then you need to have an array, a TJS array, with the coordinates. And hopefully, Bruno, I'm sure you're listening, please give us an array of latitude and longitude here of a Delphi specific type and not just TJS array. That's what I'm wishing for, because right now it would require us to basically, in kind of like what we have here, we have the lstep.coordinate rec array that gives us that data type. We'll deal with that later. And now scrolling down here, we have the add marker. That's something we can most certainly do. Map, add marker. And again, no data type. Latitude, longitude are transferred over separately. So we go here for the origin. We need to, for the latitude dot, it's a coordinate rec, right? So we do coordinate origin dot latitude, comma, and then the same for the longitude. So that's how we can add a marker for the coordinate origin, longitude. So no longer a specific data type, we just use the property latitude and longitude, and we do the same for coordinate destination. Perfect. And then here, map zoom to bounds seems to be a feature of FNC maps. So we can only set the zoom. So I'm going to set it to like 12, or let's do 11. So that's that. And now if I compile it, we're good to go again. Of course, you might argue with me, well, the service types still use the common types from FNC maps. Yes, they do. So if you were to really remove it, you would have to remove all this as well. Let's do that. Let's really create a version that does not have any dependency on FNC maps anymore. So same here. We have to get rid of this. We have to get rid of this. And I would assume right here, and also get coordinate rec has to get removed. So our classes get pretty slim now because all the functionality that we had in there is no longer there, but it compiles again. So let's see what happens. So we'd start this, and we already noticed the map is not showing. Obviously, we need to fix the map. It can't stay like this. We're not seeing it. So we must be doing something wrong. And looking at the documentation, we see that we use the correct tag. The WEB Leaflet Map is supposed to be tied to a div tag. So we're doing this correctly. Just checking again. The ID is div map. We go to the form designer. It is set to div map. The mistake is here. The height style is auto and the width style is auto. That won't work. So we have to make the height style absolute, and I set the height to 400 pixels, for example, and I compile again. And this is where we have to make a decision. I set it to 400 now, and it still doesn't work. That's kind of strange, right? So the thing is, even though we set it to absolute, the height is being taken from the HTML element here, which is 0 right now. So if we say style equals, and then height 400 pixels, so we give this div element a height, then it will work. Sadly, TMS WEB Core in this instance requires us to do the modification inside of the HTML. It is not possible to specify one thing in the HTML and then the other thing. I mean, how should TMS WEB Core make the decision which one is relevant, right? The only thing that we could argue in this case is we have right here element position EP ignore. Why isn't there something like where to take the height or location or position from with regards to height and width, like where to take the dimensions from? So that would be kind of cool if TMS WEB Core had that. It does not have at this point. So at this point, you have to set height style to SS absolute, and then the height is being taken from the style property. Obviously, you can move that into your CSS as well. However, if you leave out the height, the dimensions won't work and the component will literally be drawn with 0 height. The width, however, is taken also according to the div tag, and as we defined here, the column 12, that means it will span the whole column. I think if we were to do column 6, it would be the left 6 columns. Let's see if that works. Because some canvas-driven components, that's not a problem with TMS WEB Core, but here you see now you would be able to use something here on the right. For example, if you ever wanted to create something like a contact page, this is how you would do it. You would place your contact information here, and then you could put a map on the left. So you would use a column 6 or whatever, and then on the right you would have another column with your contact information. Okay, so that works great. As always, if you know how, it's really, really easy. So to repeat, if you were to do it from scratch, you drop the TWEB Leaflet Maps component on the form, you assign the element ID to a div tag. It has to be a div. And then the div tag needs a height in order to be drawn, not with height 0. And in order for TMS WEB Core to render it, you need to set the height style to SS absolute. The width style can stay as is, as SS auto, and you're good to go. Alternatively, you could also do width percent 100 and set width style to percent, or kind of yield the same thing because it would use 100% of the width that is provided by the div. So that would work as well. However, it might be a struggle at first to set this to SS absolute because it is kind of not intuitive, because you would say, hey, because you could say set it to auto and abide by what is inside of the HTML. Doesn't work that way. You need to set it to SS absolute because otherwise TMS WEB Core is not going to render any HTML with regards to height for it. So just a heads up, this is how it works. Now that the map is being shown, does it work? So we have our route right here, get directions. And obviously we center around the starting and the end point. Our zoom is not optimal. So let's see what is going here. So we completely zoomed to the wrong position with the code that I provided. Let's see. So the backend still sets the right stuff, but I'm zooming into Australia right now. So I would assume I mixed up some coordinates right here or something like that. Let's see, form directions, and let's go to where we set the marker. We set the zoom. Yeah, zoom to bounds, and I didn't replace it with anything. So here we have to say map, set center. And the center should be somewhere around the origin, right? So let's say lroot coordinate origin dot latitude, comma, lroot coordinate origin longitude. That should work. If you do code completion here, the two parameters are once again latitude and longitude. Perfect. So going from here, compile, and this should yield significantly better results because we set the center of the map to somewhere where we are. Right now, it's not set to anything, right? Because we simply add the markers and that's it. Zoom to bounds in FNC Maps does center the map also around those bounds. You know, that's basically two things in one that we don't have available right here. So now get directions, and it still does not move the map to where we think it would go, right? And here's a rub. It's kinda in the documentation, but not really. So we set the zoom and then we set the center. And if you simply switch it, that you set the centers first and then set the zoom, that will work. And the reason for that is, in my opinion, that the zoom takes a while. So we set the center while the zoom is still being applied, meaning asynchronous operation. And that's why it's simply not happening. I think that is the reason. So if we set the center first and then applies the zoom, then we get the result. We're almost done. There's one final thing I skipped previously and I want to show you now. The route is not being painted on the map. Right now we have the two markers, but we don't draw the polyline. The reason for that was that FNC Maps has a coordinate record array, and this data structure does not exist in Leaflet. Instead, Leaflet uses the default type that Leaflet uses, which is an array, and that array contains an array with two items each. The first item is the latitude, and the second item is the longitude. So you have a coordinate array which contains an array, and each item contains precisely two elements, one for the latitude and one for the longitude. And that's what we need to build. And because we have our grade object structure, we can add that to else step. And if we go to our service types and else step, I built the property coordinate array, which returns the official data type is, of course, TJS array, which is a JavaScript array. And the get coordinate array method then returns this. So I create a new JS array. And why does this use new, you might wonder? New is the alike of create in the JavaScript world. And because TMS WEB Core here encompasses a type that is home in JavaScript, TMS decided, well, let's use new, right? So instead of create, there is no create, there is create actually, but new is the constructor that we need to use in this case. And we could also pass the first element. And again, I mentioned this previously in this tutorial, JS value is the base type that you can pass in there to get started with anything, right? So this JS value could be another array, for example. And that's exactly what we're going to do. So we iterate all the coordinates. Remember, our coordinates are of the data type T coordinate right here. And we have a latitude and a longitude. And this will get a 2JS array. So we express this latitude and longitude as a JS array as well. So go in here, we set the length to 2, and then we say the first item is the latitude, the second item is the longitude, and then the result is that we convert this array of double to a JavaScript array. And that's what the JavaScript library, or JavaScript unit again, is good for. Here we have like 2 array, which returns a JS array. And the array of double is interpreted as a JS value. That's what the compiler does for us automatically. So with this, we return the coordinate as an array. The first element being the latitude, the second being the longitude. And that's what we're going to use in get coordinate array. We build an array, and in this array, we put each coordinate as an item, calling the 2JS array method on the coordinate. And as we don't know how many items we have, of course, we could use count and then set the length. But JavaScript arrays allow us to use push. So there is no clear distinction really between a list and an array. If you think about it, you can push, meaning add, to an array. So you just say this result push, and we add the array. And at the end, we'll end up with a coordinate array. And let me write it down one time what the array will look like. Or what I can do even better, I can output it to the console. So here I'll add console log, then I do else step dot coordinate array, and you see what the data structure looks like. And adding that to the map to draw a polyline is very similar. So we call add polyline, but the parameters are different. So if we look at add polyline, we have the coordinates, JS array, and then again a color, a width, and opacity. And there is no object that allows us to customize the polyline like we can do with FNC Maps. So that's the big difference here. We have a single call, add polyline, coordinate array, red, and width of 5, and the opacity of 0.6. The same thing in essence as we say here, but FNC Maps is way more expressive. And of course, this source code works with any of the mapping providers, whereas this is specific for Leaflet. I think if you were to flip it to the Google control that is bundled with TMS WEB Core, it would look almost the same, but still the data structure here might look different. Okay, so that's always the deciding issue where you have to make the call. Do you use FNC Maps or do you use the base component Leaflet? You don't need FNC Maps. That's literally the call that you need to make. Of course, this example now runs on the client side without FNC Maps, and on the server side, we still use FNC Maps in order to use the geocoding and the turn-by-turn directions. So let's run this. There we go. Let's open the developer console, go to console and get directions. And here we see the arrays that are being created for the different steps of the route. So look in here, first element, there's a latitude, longitude, latitude, longitude, and these are the arrays that are being drawn as a route on the map. So we get the same result, just with a different framework, so to speak, not with FNC Maps. In this case, we use Leaflet. Just don't forget to remove this, because this is going to cost performance, because every single thing is being logged to the console. And with that being removed, our application is complete. Believe it or not, we're done. This is the whole application. I've shown how to work with the Leaflet component. I've shown how it can work with FNC Maps. I've shown that we can use an FNC map on the client that doesn't require us to use an API key. And we've done some significant work with the Embarcadero Parallels library on the server. The final thing I want to share with you is the source code. I don't want you to have to type everything yourself. You should be able to try this out right away. So if you go to github.com/holgerflick/directionsweb, that's where you find all the sources for this project. Right now it's still marked as private. As soon as this video tutorial is being released, you'll see it as a public repository. The main branch is the one that I'm working on. That is the one that has the FNC Maps component. If you are interested in what the source code looks like for the TWEB Leaflet component, you can switch to the dev Leaflet branch. And there you have the source code that is designed for the TWEB Leaflet without FNC Maps. Hopefully the branches will help you to switch between the two code variations on the client using Leaflet only or using FNC Maps. In order to compile the project, you will need FNC Maps anyways, because it is required on the backend. Required also is, of course, XData, because that is our web service backend tool that we use in order to provide the backend. Thank you again for your interest in this tutorial series. I hope you liked it and it was useful to you. Please give us a thumbs up and add comments if you have ideas for tutorials in the future. Thank you. Take care. Stay safe.